What's up, guys? Brian Elwood here. Welcome back to the Virtual Real Estate Investing Podcast. Hope you guys are doing amazing today. I've got a very special episode for you guys today, and I'm really excited about this. So I have my friend Seth Williams on the show from RETipster. We're going to talk about some really cool stuff related to passive income. Seth, how you doing today, man?
I'm good, Brian. Yeah, thanks for having me on your show. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. So I didn't ask you to send me a bio or anything ahead of time, Seth. So instead of me butchering your biography, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and sort of what you do before we kick the show off?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, I guess first of all, sort of my whole philosophy about like business and income and financial freedom and all that is to be sort of diverse, like have many different sources of income that sort of function independently of each other. So, if I ever want to quit one, that's okay. I still have other income that can kind of take care of me and my family. Or if one of them starts to tank for one reason, or if the market changes, that's okay too. But just my quick story, I first started learning about real estate like back in probably 2005 or so. That was when I first started getting interested in it. But I found that it was, in my market anyway, at that time, it was very, very hard to find good cash flowing deals. I mainly just didn't know where to look. I was just looking on the MLS. That's all I really could think of to do at the time. But eventually I sort of learned of some pretty ninja ways to do direct mail and find highly motivated sellers. And I started getting into land investing. And land, the reason it really worked well for me was because it was like super low risk. I could buy the properties for like a few $100 in most cases. So like no loans were needed. There was no, tenants or anything like that on the property I had to worry about. Just a very, very simple type of property. And when I was able to buy them for that cheap, like 10 or 20% of market value, it wasn't hard to resell them for still a really good deal and still make some pretty good money in the deal. So land has sort of been where I've spent most of my time as a real estate investor. I just like it. Like of all the real estate niches that I've looked into and tried, land has been the one that I've been able to succeed the most at. So with a lot of the land proceeds that I've made over the years, I've been able to buy a couple of rental properties. So I've got those as well. I wouldn't call it like a major arm of my business, but it is something that I'm always that I intend to grow in the future. I've also got this online education real estate blog thing I've been doing for a number of years now. So that's kind of my story. The blog is really where I think part of the reason I started it back in the day was because I know there were a lot of questions I had that nobody was going to answer for me, even with the courses and stuff I was taking, still just like left a lot of unanswered questions. And I just had to slog through it and figure it out. And it took a ton of time and lots of failure and lots of obstacles I had to get over. And my idea was really, I guess I kind of feel for people who are trying to get started and they're confused and they don't know what to do. So my goal with the blog is to try to bridge the gap for a lot of people and generally not charge any money for it. Like I spend many, 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 many hours putting together this content and just putting it out there for free. So that's what RETipster.com is all about. But yeah, that's kind of my story.
That's awesome, man. And your blog is amazing. I think that's where I first discovered you, was consuming your content on your blog. And
awesome.
And you sounds like you're practicing what you preach, because you've mentioned at least 3 sources of income so far. Well, maybe your blog's mostly free, but you've got your land, you've got your rentals.
Yeah.
I want to hear more about your land investing specifically, because that's something I've never done. So I want to ask you about that here in a second. But first of all, why don't you define for our listeners what passive income really is? Because I think there's a lot of misconception around all the different types of real estate investing you could do, and this vague term of financial freedom. And, so can you talk a little bit about that before we dive in?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, just like generally speaking, like if you're just saying passive income, what comes to my mind, what that should be is money that, comes in every day or every month or every year, whether or not I am spending tons of time pursuing something. So, and I know there's lots of different ways to go about creating this, but a lot of it seems kind of elusive. I think like it's almost like it's this idea or aspiration, but like a lot of people don't really know how to put those pieces together. And I think when you're talking specifically about the real estate business, I think there are lots of different, not lots, at least a handful of ways that come to mind for me where you can get pretty close to that. But I don't think I know of anything where it is like 100% passive. Like you never have to think about it ever and the money comes in. Like I honestly can't tell you anything where that exists, but there are a few things where I think you can get close to that. And those are the kind of things that I just have a lot of interest in general. Like I want more of that in my life. So
that's a good point. So, and I agree with that. Even with the rentals and things that I have, I'd say they're 90% passive or something like that. Yeah. So is that sort of what you feel like if you can get 90% or better, then you can go ahead and check that off as a passive investment?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think so. Like, for example, when I think about the rental properties I have a property manager that takes care of those for me. And I probably spend a maximum of like 2 to 5 minutes a month, like looking at them and thinking about them. And to me, that qualifies as passive just because of the fact that like, I'm not spending a ton of my time going after it. But there's another element that sort of goes into it. I don't know that the definition of passive necessarily hinges on this, but for me, it's a major consideration. And that is like, how predictable is the income? Like, what if I have a huge vacancy for some reason and the property's empty for several months? Or, what if I have 11 months of smooth sailing, no problems, and all of a sudden I have to replace a roof on the property? So my whole year's income is gone, like that whole year basically didn't happen. Like that kind of stuff to me kind of bothers me. And that's something I kind of hate about my rental properties, just because that's sort of, you can't really get away from that. And, I would still call it passive income, but there's that unpredictable element to it. And there's probably ways you can mitigate that by like paying attention to, maintenance issues and obvious signs of disrepair. So it doesn't have to come out of left field. Like if you're just, paying attention to it, you can sort of prepare a little bit for it. But that's another thing that kind of enters my radar when I'm thinking about, okay, what can be passive and what should I be pursuing, is how predictable is that income?
Yeah, that's a good point. I have a property in Alabama right now that's vacant and has been for a few months. And the reason traces back to me sort of making a bad decision to buy it in the first place. I was just sort of overexcited and wanted to buy a deal, bought it from a turnkey company down there. And the fact that it's been sitting vacant has been weighing on my mind, thinking about it. What can I do? It's costing me money. So it's not a passive investment anymore because, it's mentally taxing me.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. Performance is linked to an investment. So really what we're kind of summarizing is it kind of takes a lot to really make something 100% passive, where it's really doing what it's supposed to be doing for your lifestyle versus detracting.
Yeah, for sure.
That's great. So let's move on and talk about what types of investments qualify as passive.
Yeah. Well, I think I've actually been brainstorming this quite a bit over the past few months, because that's kind of the direction that I want to go with my real estate investing business, and also like what I spend time talking about and researching for the RETipster blog. Is I just know that's a huge desire that a lot of people have, and it's definitely one that I have. Like more passive income, less complications, less unpredictability, that kind of thing. So for me, like when I think of what really gets close to that 100% passive mark, like one thing that comes to mind for me is something like farmland. because farmland, say if I were to buy, I don't know, 100 acres of tillable ground and lease that to a farmer. So the farmer's just paying me the annual lease payment. Whether or not the crop goes well or horrible is not really my concern for the most part. Like that risk is on their shoulders. I don't really have to maintain anything. It's just a huge plot of dirt. Really my only concern there is making sure I've got a farmer lined up to lease it each year and making sure that they make that payment to me. And ideally, if you've got a good piece of farmland, there's going to be a line of farmers waiting to lease it from you. And that payment shouldn't be something you have to fight for. Like if it's a legitimate farmer, that's going to be coming in. So like that would be one example in the real estate sphere where it's, really, really close to that 100% passive mark. I might have to like pay the property taxes every year, make sure that payment's coming in. But for the most part, like it's not a whole lot of moving pieces. There's not, toilets that are breaking or tenants that are calling me to complain at 3 a.m. Just pretty straightforward.
That's great. Can I ask a question about that before we move on to any other types? Because I know our listeners have probably not heard a lot about land, but to me, and I'm strict about this, that's why I invited you to be on the show, is like Seth understands passive income, right?
Yeah.
That really does sound to me like it qualifies as something that would just put money in your mailbox without having to work. It's pretty interesting. So I know that the questions that I'm having are probably the same ones that some other people are thinking about right now, is like, how do you go about finding a piece of farmland? How would you finance that? How would you know how much to pay for it and how much the farmer would lease it from you for, or the predictability of finding someone to lease it from you in general? I know that's a lot to sort of throw at you.
Yeah, those are all great questions.
You can choose like a couple of tips that would sort of take some of the fear away of getting more towards doing something like that.
Yeah, those are all great questions. The stuff that, in my land business, most of the deals that I have bought and sold have been residential lots. So like the kind of property that you could put a mobile home on or build a house on or maybe use for recreation. I have not done a ton of farmland specifically, and that's something I'm trying to steer towards. So I've been doing a lot of research on that. It's kind of a different ballgame in terms of what you need to evaluate before you buy the property, just how it all works. In terms of financing, third-party financing, like from a bank, is actually very, very hard, if not impossible, to get on just a residential vacant lot unless you have an immediate plan to develop it. If you just want to like buy land just because, like most lenders don't want to touch that. And I think part of the reason is that it's pretty difficult to value land. It's a very, just kind of a weird type of property. There's not a lot of comps. The data usually isn't there. It's difficult to value it and be sure about it. And lenders know that. However, when you get into farmland, it's a very different thing because, if you've got a property that is generating a known amount of revenue per acre per year, and you've got, basically just like a rental property, if you have history showing that, that gives you a lot more data to work with in terms of pegging a value on that. You're basically using the income approach that an appraiser would use when they're trying to determine the value. So it is much easier to get financing for farmland. And there's, if you're just talking to like a random bank, a lot of banks, if farming isn't their specialty, if they do it at all, they're going to require a pretty big down payment because they don't really understand it. But if you go to a agricultural lender, like I think one's called Farm Credit, there's one in Michigan called Greenstone. There's probably a ton of other ones out around the country, but they understand farmland. Like they totally get it. They understand how it works, and they can usually get you some pretty decent terms. Like you could do a 30-year mortgage. I know Farm Credit, when I talk to them, they've got either a 15% down 15-year mortgage or a 20% down 20-year mortgage. So it just kind of depends on what you need to make a cash flow and what you're looking for. And they really look at the same kinds of things to qualify you that a residential mortgage lender would look at, like your personal credit history, they don't take in the income from the farming lease into account. So it's like, if you can't pay for it independently, then that's a problem. But yeah, so financing is totally doable as long as you have the financial strength to get approved by a lender, and you can find a lender that's interested in that. In terms of finding the value of the property, if it's for farming specifically, there's a website out there called acrevalue.com where it kind of depends on which county you're looking in, but for a lot of counties in the U.S., they have I don't know if it's an algorithm or what I think they use past sales and lease rates and things like that, I think, to come up with their numbers. But a lot of industry farming people use that website as kind of like the gold standard for understanding what property is worth per acre in a given area. So it's, I think you still have to look at the property specifically and understanding, like, is this ground even tillable? Like, is it ready for farming? Like, you can't just blindly obey acrevalue.com, but it is a pretty helpful starting point, just in understanding what is farmland going for in this particular county. And you'll find that in some counties that might be like $2,000 an acre. In other counties, it could be $10,000 an acre. So pretty big range of prices depending on what market you're looking in.
That's pretty cool. I've never thought about the fact that basically as soon as a land goes from being zoned residential to agricultural, it's like there's this inherent cash flow that can be derived from each acre because you can grow crops on it. So all of a sudden it has value that a residential lot might not have.
Yeah.
But you said you've done some residential deals. I'm interested in those too. So tell us about one of the residential land deals that you did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, trying to think of just one that I've done sort of recently. So yeah, there was a group of 4 properties I actually bought sort of in the Southwest U.S. This past year, and all 4 properties, each one was about 20 acres in size, so it's like 80 plus acres altogether, and they were each subdivided residential lots, and they were part of a homeowners association. And the deal was this HOA was kind of expensive. It was like $1,500 per year just to own land in this HOA. And because of that, a lot of the owners sort of wanted out. Like, they were tired of paying that for land that they weren't even using. And usually when I see a deal that's part of an HOA, that kind of scares me away from it too, because I don't want to be paying for that either. Mm-hmm. But the difference with these particular deals was that when the subdivision was developed about a decade ago, these lots were selling for about $80,000 a pop on average. And I got all 4 of them under contract from about $2,000 to $3,000 a piece.
Wow.
So, you just see right there, there's a massive profit margin, and, no loans for me. I'm just buying them all cash. And really the big drawback is, what if I can't sell these within a year? Then I have to pay $1,500 a piece. So, I was sort of going out on a limb, but at the same time, sort of not, because I just knew they were going to be worth way more than I was paying for. There's this big buffer of protection built into each deal. Mm-hmm. And, after I owned them, I found that they definitely were not going to be selling for $80,000. Like, that was kind of what was happening 10 years ago, and not necessarily what people would pay today. But I did end up selling each one for about like the $20,000 range a piece. Mm-hmm. So way less, but still, going from $2,000 to $3,000 to $20,000, it's not hard to make a profit in that situation. And the only thing that was required was I had to basically give these people an easy button and take that annoyance out of their life. Mm-hmm. So yeah, those are. And I think sort of the difference that I'm seeing as I get more into the farmland thing is that it's really, honestly, like, it's not hard to find good deals on a residential lots, because there's just a lot of properties out there where people bought them thinking that they were going to use them, and then they didn't, and then it's just a tax bill, and it's just kind of a pointless property that they're paying for. With farmland, though, if it's tillable and if it's being used, like, it's generating an income for somebody. So, like, they're going to be saying goodbye to that income if they sell it to you. So I can't say I've done this enough to know definitively, but my gut is telling me it's a little harder to find these like pennies on the dollar deals on good pieces of farmland, because it's just kind of a different animal when there's a stream of income involved.
That's awesome. So I know one thing that listeners have got to be curious about is sort of how to go about finding these deals. So if you're searching for deals, whether it's residential or farm, specifically land, how do you go about finding these deals?
Yeah. Well, there's several different ways to go about it. When I was first getting started, what I used was something called the delinquent tax list, which every county has this. Whether or not they're willing to give it to you is another story, but you basically call the county where you're looking for properties, and you usually the treasurer or the county IT department can help you out with this. Again, if they're willing to make it easy. Sometimes they won't, but you can basically buy this list from them. And the list is every property in that county that is currently delinquent on property taxes. And the reason this particular list is helpful is that every single property on this list is basically holding up a red flag saying, my owner doesn't want me, or they can't afford me, or, it's for one reason or other, like there's a reason why they're not paying their taxes. Maybe they even forgot about it, but there's usually a higher likelihood that these people are willing to sell for nothing as opposed to just a random property owner off the street who has been paying their taxes. So I found that to be really helpful. Another way is to basically just get a very specific filtered list of landowners, and you can get pretty specific on which, like the sizes of the properties, the zip codes they're in, all this stuff. You can basically download a list from a service like DataTree or Agent Pro 24/7 or ListSource. There's lots of services like that out there. But basically just get really specific about the types of vacant lots you're looking for, get that list. And the benefit of going that direction is that the lists are way easier to get. They're a lot easier to sort through. That's actually the route that I go these days, mainly because I don't have time to monkey around with all the games that the county plays, and they don't make it easy. But if you can't get that list and sort through it, it is very, very effective at producing responses and that kind of thing. So there's kind of trade-offs either way, but so those are kind of like the direct mail approaches. You can go get the list from the county, or you can get it from a direct mail service. Another thing that I set up years ago was a buying website, and I hired some search engine optimization help on Upwork. And they basically, I don't know exactly what they did. I think they threw links to my website all over the internet and did all kinds of tricky stuff. But I get multiple property submissions per day from people all over the U.S.
Wow.
that want to sell their property. And a lot of these leads don't go anywhere. But the nice thing is, I'm not paying any direct mail costs for these leads. They just come to me. And another downside is because they're all over the place, I have to sort of learn every single market and make sure I understand property values before I proceed with those deals. But again, they're free. So I have bought a number of properties through just the submissions that come in off the website, and there's something to be said for leads that just kind of come in on their own and don't cost anything.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Back in our wholesaling and flipping days, land was actually always our highest ROI direct mail list, because we always track how much should we spend versus make on each list. And it was a small list, in Nashville, I think it only had 800 records or so on it. But, we found the deepest discounted deals that would sell for the most, because kind of like you're saying, land is just something that there's always going to be people out there that own land that they don't want, and they're willing to sell for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really apply as much for a house, at least a house in good shape, maybe a house that's falling down, which basically means land anyways. And ListSource, one thing I liked about that is that we could filter by zoning code too. And so we could pick we used to go after lots that were only really big, like 20,000 square feet and up or something like that, to wholesale residential lots, because we knew you could build 4 to 8 houses on a lot that size in Nashville. But yeah, that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk to you about your blog and your education business, sort of the vision for that. Before we kind of shift gears, is there any final tips you want to give people as far as creating passive income in their lives goes?
Yeah, I know for me, what has been very, very helpful is like a lot of times to create those sources of passive income, like it takes money. Like it doesn't necessarily take millions, but like you need something. At least I did with the ones that I have created. And if I were just relying on the income I made from my job years ago, like if I limited myself only to that, like I probably would have gotten to where I was going, but like it would have taken me 30 years to get there, and tons of patience and a lot of monotony. I'm basically just going the slow way. But something that can really kick it into overdrive is finding something that will be like your cash machine, something that can give you these influxes of cash that you need in order to go out and start buying properties and getting deals under contract. I mean, cash is super, super powerful. I mean, for obvious reasons, but just in terms of like getting deals and closing fast and just allowing you to move quickly. Like if you can do, like that's a lot of the reason I get these land deals is because I can pay cash for them. I don't have to wait 30 days and get approved for a mortgage or something like that. So I'd say it doesn't have to be the land business. That's what it's been for me, but try to figure out something that can, generate the big paychecks so that you can get there faster. And I think there's tons of different ways to skin that cat. But for me, the reason land worked was because I could do it on a part-time basis. It didn't involve a ton of risk. I didn't have to be a genius. Like I didn't know I didn't need to know how to rehab a house or any of that stuff. So anyway, but yeah, I'd say whatever you can find, just make that a big priority because it'll help a lot in getting you to where you want to go.
It's a great point. Yeah, I do talk some about how you can buy houses with none of your own money. Although I recommend people have $5,000 per house as sort of like an emergency fund.
Yeah.
However, if I coach somebody who comes to me and says, I've got $300,000 in cash, I'm ready to start buying rentals, I'm like, man, you are about to be off to the races.
It's an amazing place to be in, for sure.
You could buy 6 houses for $50,000 each and renovate or rent them all out and then do cash out refis and get your money back out and get, 6 more and be at 12 rental properties within 12 months, very easily.
Yeah.
So cash is an amazing accelerator. That's great advice. So let's talk about RETipster for a bit. Tell us a little bit more about that, what you kind of do within that company, and what is your vision for RETipster?
Yeah. RETipster is a blog I started.
I said REI again. RETipster, guys.
No problem at all. Yeah. RETipster is a blog I started back in 2012. And one of the reasons I started it, or one of the things that motivated me to, was I had discovered another blogger. His name is Pat Flynn. Have you heard of Pat Flynn?
Yeah, smart passive income. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and I was so blown away by the content he was making because, like, it was good stuff, like stuff that like I would have paid some serious money for, and it was just like free. Like he was just putting it out there, and I was like, man, like if I can be that guy for the real estate investing space, like that would be just a great aspiration to provide that kind of value. So, something that I've learned about myself over the years is that I'm actually like a fairly slow learner. Like I usually need to be told something several times before it sticks. And I have to really I don't know. I'm kind of dumb, I guess, in that way. But like the nice thing is, or the way that's sort of helped me and helped other people is that like, in order for me to understand something, like I really need to know it well. And because I know it well, and because my brain sort of thinks at like a, 8th grade level versus like a college PhD level, like it's not hard for me to explain things in a very simple, relatable way. So anyway, because I sort of have learned, like, I know how to do this. I can do it halfway decent. My goal really with every video and blog post and podcast episode that I put out there, like, my goal is for it to change somebody's life. Like, by the time they get to the end of this, like, there needs to be a paradigm shift. Like, this was a serious pivotal moment in their life when they read what I put out there. And it also needs to make sense to everybody. Like, I can't be over people's heads and super complicated, even if I know it to that point. Like, it needs to be something that everybody can understand. So I really put a lot of effort into just making it simple and relatable and easy to understand. And I love that kind of stuff. Like, I look forward to doing that every day. So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. And as the site has been growing and just picking up steam, I've been trying to make the site like easier to navigate. We just launched the site with a totally new design, and there's a really cool search functionality now that's like really smart. It's kind of like Google, where it uses an algorithm to like help people find exactly what they're looking for. So yeah, that's kind of the idea behind the blog, is to be a free resource that people find legitimately helpful, preferably the kind of thing they would pay money for, but they don't have to. So
that's awesome, man. I get the sense that you take a lot of pride in, or not pride, but, you take creating the content very seriously, and you make sure that everything you release is really good and designed to be understandable and to change someone's life. So yeah, that's very respectable because, me just sort of learning the content marketing world, the status quo is almost just to churn out as much as possible now, and just little tidbits of crap everywhere. And you're sitting there and really taking time to make something quality. And I think that's what sort of drew me to you in the first place, and in your content.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
So tell us, where can people go to connect with you, find out more about what you're doing, that kind of thing?
Sure. Yeah. Well, there's, there's all kinds of ways. I've got a contact page on RETipster.com. There's a Facebook group I've been running, the RETipster community. I know you've got a Facebook group going as well, which I'm part of. Mm-hmm. So it's similar kind of thing to that. You can always hit me up on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, any of those things. I generally try to pay attention to people who are trying to reach out to me. And I will say I have been getting like slammed with emails and stuff over the past year. So I do have a virtual assistant now that helps me out with this a lot. Her name is Violetta. So you may hear from her if you try to reach out, but ultimately that stuff does make it to me. So if you want to reach out using any of those mediums, you should be able to get to me.
Smart man. Got to delegate.
Yeah. Took me a long time to figure that out.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you being on the show, Seth, and thanks for your time. It's really super valuable information you shared with us today.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, it's great to talk to you. Thanks for having me on, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Sounds great. All right, guys. Seth Williams from RETipster. Everybody, go check out his stuff, and I will see you guys on the next episode. Peace.